Good afternoon. Today is the 28th of June, and as you can see, I'm joined today by my friend, Mr. Andy Shaw.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
And Mr. Shaw and I are down in Letchmore Heath near Watford for the annual Avengers Dead Man's Treasure Hunt weekend. Before you think, well, how can I get to that? It's a closed event, it's invitation only, and it's for the most obsessed people about series of the 1960s and 70s filmed at Elstree Studios, Pinewood and other places. Stuff like the Persuaders, the Avengers, the Saint. And we're just taking a bit of time out this afternoon in Letchmore Heath, where they filmed a lot of these old series like Randall Hawker at the Seas, Department S, the Avengers, to talk about the cars of the Professionals. So Andy, how do you feel about Professionals?
Series. The Professionals, the whole thing just takes me back to my youth. It was an amazing time, and as somebody who was very little and very small, I used to look up to the Professionals. I used to look up to Bodie and Doyle. I idolised them, and I thought, when I grow up, one day I'll be like that, and I'll drive a car like that. And none of those things have happened.
Yeah. So let's go into it. Let's talk about how Professionals got started. So there were three main characters in the Professionals. There are Bodie and Doyle, and then there's a boss Cowley. Bodie's played by Lewis Collins, Doyle's played by Martin Shaw, and their boss Cowley is played by Gordon Jackson. They are part of a fictional crime-fighting agency which is called CI5, which doesn't really exist. It's sort of a cross between, like Special Branch and MI5 and things like that. And I think Brian Clemens, who credited Professionals, chose that name because it sounded a bit like the CIA and a bit like MI5. And it was filmed between 1977 and 1981 and broadcast on London Weekend Television between 1977 and 1983.
Wow, that's quite encyclopedic. That is a fairly good rundown of the show.
Well, we aim to please, sir.
It was famous for many people, for the two lead stars, Lewis Collins and Martin Shaw, and also for the action scenes, and more importantly, for the cars that were involved in the action scenes that Josie's going to take us through now.
Yes, so we'll go through season by season. There were 5 seasons in total, although if you want to look at like production blocks and broadcast blocks, they are a little bit different, but I don't want to get into the detail of that. There's other resources on the internet that will tell you about that. But I just want to talk about the main cars in this video. We'll talk about the sort of what I will call the guest cars in another video. Otherwise, this will just be too long. So in the first series, they actually inherited some cars from the New Avengers that are just about sort of wound down its production by the time Professionals was being filmed. The reason that was the case was because Brian Clemens and Albert Fennell, who were two of the main people from the Avengers, particularly the latter years of the Avengers, had started the New Avengers, and by June, July 77, they were filming episodes in France and in Canada. And the team doing that was not, the sort of main unit. Brian Clemens never went to Canada, for example, and they wanted to get started on another series of Professionals. So they actually had the first car, which we'll mention, a 1976 Rover 3500, also known as an SD1. Now, do you remember that car from New Avengers, Andy?
I do, a bit, yes, I do. It was like a beige colour, wasn't it?
It's actually yellow.
That's what I mean, a yellowy colour. It's more like a mustard, isn't it? It's more like a mustard colour. Yes, that I do vaguely remember it from there, yes.
So the original registration number of that car was MOC 229P, and it was a pre-production 3500. They actually, when the New Avengers was being filmed, towards the beginning of it was April 76 they started filming that, they had to get around on a trailer and cover it up because it wasn't actually released to the public at the time. The car was apparently very unreliable, so why they held on to it for the Professionals, I really don't know. I think it was just time, and if you read Andrew Pixie's book that was released with one of the DVD sets about the Professionals, there's a whole history of how rubbish British Leyland were
At the time, yeah.
about, you know, providing cars and things. And if you look up there, I'm going to also put a link to my video where I talk about how terrible British Leyland were in the New Avengers and The Professionals. But what they did with this particular car, they decided to hold on to it, and you'll see it in a few episodes that were filmed sort of first of The Professionals. They decided to change the registration number from MOC229P to MOO229R by using little bits of black tape. It was just typical British Leyland sort of thing that they used to do. So yeah, it was, you know, nice V8 engine, not the best build quality. I think the later ones made of the SD1 were better, but that sort of lasted a sort of while, and it was, you know, Gordon Jackson's car right at the beginning of filming of Professionals.
And that was the era, if you cast your mind back, of like the first generation of velour interiors in cars, and where a Speedo wasn't round anymore, you had like an oblong Speedo in there. It was all very futuristic. If you look at any of the cars that preceded it, and then you pull out the SD1, and you look back now, you can realise, you know, if you're at a motor show and you just go and have a look, you'll realise how futuristic it must have been back then. It was a very futuristic car. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. Then they actually changed his car halfway through. They did a deal with Ford halfway through the first series, and he changed to a brand new Mark II Ford Granada. I'll just read my notes here and tell you the registration number, because you viewers out there like to know things like that. It was a Granada 2-litre L. I know I said in my Granada Mark II Tweed Jacket reviews video it's a GL, it's actually an L. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I do apologise. It was a sort of sandy beige colour, VHK 456S. What do you think of the Mark II Ford Granada, Andy?
Again, you could see the American influence in it, because it was a very large car. You know, again, up until then, cars didn't tend to be that big. They'd all sort of slimmed down from, if you like, the whole Rover stuff in the 60s after the oil crisis in 74. Cars had become smaller, and then all of a sudden you had this big American style, American spec car arrive on the scene. It was quite unusual. It was quite incongruous because of its size. People didn't have cars that size at that point in time. So yes, it was an executive car. It was a top-notch car, and you know, it was like a king-size double bed on 4 wheels, wasn't it? It was huge. It was in its time. It was a big car. If you put it next to a Mini and look at it, you'll think, oh blimey, yeah, that is colossal. I think it was more of the same, wasn't it? It was the interiors were quite bleak. It wasn't, for the size of the car, you might have thought that it would have a kind of, you know, reminiscing of an old Jaguar with big wooden panels and stuff like that, but it wasn't. It was very minimalist. It was all velour interiors, plastic dashes, plastic rocker switches, plastic gear sticks. There was nothing kind of organic about it. It was all very plastic and velour. But again, it was a very simplified styling, and it was a very, of its time, a modern styling. It was a turn away from all the wood panelling and everything that had gone before it, into a more sleek and what they felt was a modern look. But when you look back on it now, if you go and see one of those cars, you will be struck by how basic it is inside. It's quite a basic car.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're looking at like a Gear X, which has, you know, air conditioning, trip computer, electric seats on the facelifted version that I drove, it is not as well equipped as a modern car at all. The 2-litre L was, you know, right down the bottom of the range. I don't really know why they gave such a basic car, but that would probably be more appropriate for someone who's working for a government department rather than having the fancy ones. So yeah, I mean, I really like Mark II Granadas. I think they're great. You know, if you want to see more about Mark II Granada, then, you know, please do look at the Tweed Jacket reviews video of it, which I'll put a link to up there. So let's get on to what Martin Shaw and Lewis Collins drove in the first series. Now, the first car they actually filmed, this isn't broadcast order versus a production order. They filmed an episode called Old Dog with New Tricks first. That was the first episode they filmed, and British Leyland didn't actually supply them with a car to use apart from the Rover 3500. So they actually just got in from one of the stunt people a 1971 Rover 2000 automatic, which is kind of like a brown colour. What do you think about those Rover P6s, Andy?
I think, well, you know, they're the forgotten car, aren't they?
Yeah.
These days, if I said, you know, Rover P6, I could probably approach 1,000 people in the street and none of them would have a clue what I was talking about, even some of the people who lived through that time.
Yeah.
The Rover P6 really is the forgotten car, and I think the brown colour just encapsulates everything about the Rover P6. They weren't available, or I didn't see them in any fancy colours at all. I saw them in the mustard colours, I saw them in the brown colours. I've not, you know, there was nothing special about the car outwardly. But again, if you go back and look at it now, you can kind of appreciate the design. But back then, I don't know why you didn't and you couldn't. It just, they were used as police cars, weren't they?
There's lots and lots of those in the Professionals, particularly the first series.
Yeah. And in terms of, you know, visibility, in the day they were ubiquitous. You saw them everywhere.
Absolutely.
And they were quite undervalued. And I think the problem is that people would always go now for a different car rather than a P6, and consequently the numbers around have dwindled and dwindled and dwindled down to the point you are now, where you only see them at car shows. You only really see them at car shows, and not very many of them either. But they are, again, a very futuristic car, and a very, you know, now that if you can look back and find an unmolested version, you can see the beauty in it. There is some beauty in the design, yes. Yeah,
they're very attractive cars, and you know, Matt Richardson from Furious Driving's actually got two of them. I'll put a link to one of his P6 reviews in the description below. They are very undervalued even now. They're not expensive cars to buy at all. Compared with like a Granada, I mean, a nice Granada is going to cost you between £15,000 and £20,000. P6 probably get a nice one for about £4,000. I think that's incredible, really.
I saw an absolutely immaculate first generation P6 advertised probably about a year ago in red, that was totally unmolested. It was one of the first ones ever produced, and that was for sale for £9,500, and it was utterly perfect.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing what you can sort of get. I mean, I wouldn't say that car is particularly in keeping with the kind of hard driving nature of Professionals. It's more like, you know, they just had to find something quickly, and it
was wallowing around, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's also it's an automatic. But there's one shot in Old Job on New Tricks that he actually floors it away. I think it's filmed in Kensington somewhere, and he gets a wheel spin, which in an automatic is quite difficult. I mean, there's not a lot of power in a 4-cylinder engine. But it kind of it's all right. I quite like the look of it. It's a pre-facelift car. It's not the Series 2 model, and it's definitely not the 2200. It's the earlier one. So that one's EMK 760J for those of you who were watching. Later on, though, Doyle got a different car, and it's actually a type of car that you use slow, isn't it, Andy?
We're talking the TR7?
We are indeed, yes.
The TR7.
Yes, indeed.
He was man about town in the TR7, wasn't he?
Yes, sir.
You know, that was when he was in his flat, and, you know, you got to see a bit more of him and everything. And he had funky flat with what looked like a fitted kitchen, actually, at the time. It looked like there was elements of a fitted kitchen in there.
Yeah.
But the car, the TR7 was another futuristic car that British Leyland produced right at the very end. It was a wedge-shaped car. It was designed to sell into the California market. It was available in a hardtop and a convertible, and everybody wanted the convertible. But the one that was used in the series was a hardtop.
That's right, yeah.
And it had a checkered interior.
Yep.
So it had like a checkerboard interior that...
It kind of looks a bit like a Capri interior in that way, because Not Free Capris also had a colour check. We'll get onto those later. The convertible didn't come out until about 1979, so... You know, until then, they were all hardtops. And the TR7 was a very interesting car because they had a very troubled production life. It went through 3 factories actually: Speke, which is Liverpool, which closed, then Solihull, and then Cowley. They made it all 3 places, and production ended in '81 because they just dropped the Triumph name apart from the Acclaim.
And it had the 4-cylinder engine. It had
That's
a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, which was the same engine that was in the Stag, which was a V8, but with one of the V's cut off. So consequently, the engine sat in the TR7 on at a 45-degree angle, and the cylinder head on it is apparently interchangeable. So with the one that was on the Stag, so I'm told. So
I think the Stag's got 2 cylinder heads on a V8. I might be wrong about that.
Two.
Yeah,
but the TR7 has just got 1.
Yeah.
So that one, the right hand, whatever it is interchangeable with the same one on the Stag.
but the engine in the TR7, or rather not the TR7 V8, because that's a Rover 3500
Yes, yeah.
V8. The one in the standard TR7, that's not the same as Dolomite Sprint, is it?
No, the Dolomite Sprint engine, it's the same block and it's the same bore and stroke and compression and everything, but the Dolomite Sprint head is a 24 valve head, so it's a twin cam head.
16 valve.
Sorry, beg your pardon, 16 valve head, so it's a twin cam head. So the difference between the TR7 is the cylinder head.
Yeah.
And the Sprint. Yeah.
Because the TR7, if I remember correctly, produced about 105 horsepower, whereas the Dolomite Sprint was about 127, something like that. It was a little bit different.
I think it might have been a bit more than that, actually.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not an expert on these things.
The power differential. I should say that I used to own a TR7.
Yeah.
And I built myself a Dolomite Sprint engine. I went and bought a brand new Dolomite Sprint block that was being sold off by my local Leyland garage, Rocar they were called, and I got a second-hand Sprint head and built it up, fitted the 2 together, and dropped it in my TR7, which was a convertible. Yeah. And I tell you now, the
amazing.
Difference was like night and day.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
It was utterly amazing. The amount of torque that existed in that engine was just sensational. You could accelerate in fifth up a steep hill, and it would pull and accelerate. Incredible.
Yeah, they really should just stop that engine in all the TR7s. I don't know why they didn't. The management policies of British Leyland in the 70s were really strange. Anyway, so Dole then moved on towards the end of filming when Ford finally started supplying the cars because British Leyland had been so rubbish. He moved on to a Mark II Capri, not a Mark III, it's a Mark II, a very late Mark II Capri. It's a 3-litre S, so the S6 V6 engine, but actually an X-Pack Capri. What do you make of the look of that particular Capri, Andy?
It's kind of the intermediate one, isn't it? The first generation was the designer's original take on it, and then they just got heavier and heavier, didn't they? But I think it was a very period look of its time. But you can't help but draw the similarities between the long bonnet on the Capri and the long bonnet on the E-Type Jag. It's just too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, and of course in Hunter x Hunter, which is the first episode of season 2 broadcast, Martin Short does actually drive an E-Type Jaguar. It's a Series 3.
That ends up, was that the one that ended up in the fireball?
It does, yeah. They blew up an old E-Type shell. It is a bit of a shame, but that's just kind of what happens. The X-Pack, for those of you who don't know, was like a sort of almost like accessory pack for the Capri, and this particular one had really wide arches, big rear spoiler, and some big wheels on it. I'm not sure I like the look of the X-Pack as much as the standard Capri, but obviously it looks a pretty mean kind of car. Definitely means business in that.
And it's always in the programs. It is always screeching away, accelerating. And it's funny because when you watch them back, you can see that there's only ever one back wheel spinning because it hasn't got a limited slip diff.
No.
So there's one back wheel spins when they screech away.
Yeah.
Or the other thing that they do is they brake really hard into a shot, and then somebody opens the door and gets out just before the cars stop moving. And you think, how many times must they have filmed that, and how many times must they have snapped the door stay clean off while they're trying to get that shot? But they had a hard life, those cars, didn't they? A really hard life.
They certainly did, and that's why they tended to keep replacing the cars every season. So just so I don't forget to do this. Registration number of the TR7. It was a Leyland supplied cars, OOM734R. It's very similar to a car that's used in the Return of the Saint. There is a blue and a yellow one. This one's blue, and the Capri Res X pack is SO0636R, classic Ford press street registration. Let's finish off a look at the first series. We're talking about Lewis Collins and
Oh dear,
gosh, the car mount
we've had a
car mount
failure.
has had a bit of a wobbly there. Andy just reattached it. Hopefully that is still recording. Yes, it is. Good.
There we go.
So the Dolomite Sprint that Lewis Collins had, that is a serious car. That was a white one with a black vinyl roof.
Yeah.
All Dolomite Sprints had a vinyl roof as standard.
POK77R or something?
POK79R.
Oh,
You
right.
almost did it, sir. What do you rake of the look of that car and his character?
The car was it's round. It's sort of it's not like the other cars, which have all been sort of glamorous. Sort of pointy styling. The Dolomite Sprint is very much a squarer car. It's like a blown up version of a Mini. It's all a very upright window frames, no lean on them. Everything's very angular. The front grille is it's like someone's got a checkered flag and sort of wrapped it round the grille and stuck it in. It's got big squares in it. The wheels are alloy wheels, but the most important thing about a Dolomite Sprint is its power to weight ratio. The car is made of baked bean canteen. It weighs almost nothing, and then it has got this huge 2-litre twin cam engine in there, which is an amazing engine. I cannot tell you, if you've driven one, everyone who's driven a Dolomite Sprint says how awesome the performance is, and they're completely blown away by the performance, even now. So yeah, a super high performance car. No, this can't keep carrying on.
Hopefully that will sort itself out in a bit. Excuse us for a
Okay.
second whilst Andy fixes the mount. There we go.
Oh, well.
They are amazing cars. I mean, I had a Dolomite 1500 SE that was a special edition, like run-out model towards the end of production, and that had been transformed by the time I bought it into a Sprint lookalike. So it had the 4 headlamp conversion. The 1500 SEs did not have 4 headlamps; they had 2 square ones, and it had a lot of Sprint bits in it. It had like a wood on the door trims.
Yeah, you got wood on the top of the door.
Yeah,
didn't
wood
you?
was real wood. Have a Sprint alloy wheels on it. I mean, that was the business, that car. I mean, I had to sell it because it was terribly unreliable. It was British Island after all.
Velour interior.
It had a velour interior, yeah.
And lots of rust.
The rust wasn't too bad. It was a little bit on it, but it wasn't too bad. Yeah, it's nice car. I very much like the Dolomite Sprint. I think it's very appropriate for the character of Bodhi. The thing I noticed when you watch the episodes where it's in is the fact that the car looks a lot more upright rather than a Capri. It's a much more upright sort of car. It's much more old-fashioned because the design actually dates back to the mid-60s.
Yeah.
It's a much more old-fashioned car than, say, the Capri is. But then he moved on to another Capri Mark II towards the end, which is a sort of bronze colour. It's a Capri 3-litre gear with a vinyl roof again. What do you make of that car, Andy?
Was that the one with the tennis racket headrests?
No, that's the Mark III.
That's Mark III, right. I can remember it. I can definitely remember it. That car must have led a very hard life indeed.
Every time I see him on film, he's just like fishtailing it. There's a bit in when the heat cools off, which is for the last episode filmed of Series 1, and he's fishtailing it into a muse, really for no reason whatsoever. And it's clearly Lewis Collins doing it. You can see it's him.
It's gratuitous,
it's just
isn't it?
completely
It's
unnecessary.
gratuitous. Every time you watch the series, in every take, that car is either screeching to a halt or wheel spinning away from somewhere. And with the action as well, with somebody slinging the door open and jumping out right at the very end. They led a very hard life. I can't remember much about the interior of that car now. I remember the shape of it, I remember the colour, I remember the wheels, but I can't. Do you know what the interior is like, Joseph?
I'm not very good on sort of interiors of that sort of thing, but it would have been quite luxurious. It was for gear after all.
Yeah.
Equivalent to the 3000E, which was made as the Mark 1 Capri.
So it would have had headrests. It would probably have those round headrests rather than the tennis racket.
Yeah,
ones that
it
came
definitely had a
later on.
brown interior because you can see it in various episodes. again, like when the heat cools off, you see it in
Yeah.
that. And I think it's again an appropriate car for his kind of character. I think Doyle's probably the sort of big, loud X-Pac. I think Bodie, this almost like a James Bond type character in some ways. He's a bit more of a sort of standard secret agent. Yeah, exactly. So he's a bit more sophisticated. He has the gear.
Yeah. I think what it's hard to appreciate now is how difficult those cars were to drive in that way. A Capri was great in a straight line. You got in a 3-litre Capri and you shot off in a straight line and everything was wonderful. But as soon as you tried to take a corner in it or do any kind of sporty, shall we say, manoeuvring, it was lethal. And you could quite easily end up facing the other way, or even worse, wrapping it round the lamppost. And so the guys I know in the series did a lot of their own driving, a lot of their own stunts driving.
Right, yeah.
They were really, really, really good at it. It's hard to give them credit for that because it's not something that immediately jumps out at you when you watch it, is it? But they were really good. And Lewis Collins must have, to handle that car and to get it to do what he did, believe me, that's not what that car's good at doing. He really had some skill to do that. Yeah, he really handled it well.
Well, let's move on to talking about the cars used in the second series of the Professionals, actually the third series as well, because they're very, very similar. In the second series, Ford had total control over what cars they supplied the main stars with, and they supplied a Mark III Capri to Lewis Collins. That had a fake plate on it in both the second and the third series, UOO303T.
Yeah.
There were actually 2 Capris used, one in each series. I've got the notes here which tell me what the registration numbers of those were. Yes, the first one, which is in the second series, VHK 495S. VHK is a classic prefix you find with these Ford press cars, and in the third series is COO251T. COO251T, that car's still around, and you do see it at shows and things like that. I'm not sure about VHK 495S. I've read conflicting information about that, whether or not it still exists or not. It might do. I mean, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. The Mark III, I think, is probably for me the best looking of the Capris. I think it looks absolutely brilliant, and the 3-litre S Mark III Capri is the most famous Capri, I think, of all. Because of the Professionals and how the exposure they had in it. I mean, they used 3-litre S for 4 out of the 5 series, I think it just looks wonderful. In an episode called Man About the Past, there's this amazing handbrake turn Lewis Collins actually does in front of a bus stop, when he thinks he's being chased by Ed Bishop in a Triumph 2.5 PI, and he just gets a round of applause when he comes out. He slides over the bonnet, gets in a gun crouching position, and
there's nobody there, is
Ed Bishop disappears. So there's a queue of people waiting at the bus stop, and they applaud him for his driving, and it's clearly Lewis Collins actually doing it. And I think that's just what sums it up, really, isn't it?
Amazing. They got those cars to do things which, you and I would be in hospital trying, without a doubt. I think that the car, as you said, Joseph, was kind of the final iteration where they got the styling to be very up to the minute. It's very of its time, but in its time it was quite butch styling. They'd given the car, when the car first came out, it was always like Pina Ferrari type of styling, but by the time we got then, the car almost emulated the guys, didn't it? It was, it was the car used in the Professionals, but it was how the car that was used in the Professionals you would think should look at the time. It was, I think the styling was just right and very, very masculine look that they got to it. And it was a great seller for Ford in the UK, wasn't it? It wasn't really a big seller anywhere else, was it? I don't think they did it in America, did they?
Not the Mark III. They sold the Mark I and the Mark II, generally through Mercury dealers, although what they actually badged it was up to for debate. It's kind of known as Mercury Capri, kind of not. The Mark III was not sold in America, and actually production for every other market apart from Britain finished in '84. Right-hand drive production continued until December '86, but we, for some reason, loved the Capri, and
we loved it.
I'm sure Professionals was one of the main reasons why people kept buying them.
Absolutely, everybody wanted to be Doyle, or Bodie.
That's right. And talking about Doyle, we're now onto another iconic car of the Professionals, which
There's
was
such a lot.
the 1976 Ford Escort Rs 2000.
Oh, the holy grail. The holy grail
I know.
of
I mean,
Ford cars from that generation.
You try finding a actual real RS 2000 in proper condition these days. It's really, really hard, isn't it?
I'm sure if you advertise saying I've got a chassis number, a gearbox and a wheel, somebody would probably give you 60k for it. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about this particular car was that it wasn't a brand new one when it was supplied. So the Capris that were supplied to Lewis Collins, one was a 78, one was a 79. This one was a 76, and again it had a fake plate for filming, which was PNO 641T, but it was actually originally registered PNO 672R, and it had been around sort of a while. But I mean, that is Dole's car, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. He had that for a significant period of time, didn't he? And I think it's the car that when anybody sort of looks back and remembers what Doyle was driving, they always see him in that. In your mind, you always see him in that car. It was a white car. It had a black vinyl roof.
Had a vinyl roof, yeah.
It had headrests. It was an RS 2000. And so it had the wheels.
The RS wheels.
The RS wheels.
It did, yeah.
And it had genuine performance, and it had genuine good handling skills, which is fairly obvious in the series. I think its handling was much better than the Capris, and you could tell that because when they're putting it into a slide in the series, they've got to work a lot harder, and the car's input speed is a lot higher when they get it to break away. A superb car, very modern, it's like a wedge-shaped front grille.
Unique to the RS 2000, of course.
Yeah. You could tell that it was a hot car straight away, and it was a hot car. It had great performance. Yeah, very, very well suited to Doyle.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the reason why they stopped using it was actually because by 1980 the Mark III Escort had come out, which had nothing to do with the Mark II at all, front-wheel drive, hatchback, and they wanted him to not drive around in an old-looking car, which is why they eventually moved him to the Mark III Capris that we'll talk about in a bit. Didn't you used to have a Mark II Escort, Andy?
I did. I've owned a Mark I Escort and a Mark II Escort. Yes, back in the day, I had a Mark II Escort. It was beige, and I think it had like a checkered interior, but not the posh checkered interior.
Not the colour check from the Capris.
The very basic
no.
one. It was a 1.3 Popular Plus. And the one thing that I remember about that car, other than its real donkey upper mountain performance, was how poorly it handled. It was absolutely shocking at handling. I remember I was driving through some country roads and I was following a Porsche 911, and he wasn't racing, he wasn't going quickly, he was just driving through the country roads, windy roads, and every time I went round the corner, my wheels screeched right the way around, and to the point where he was looking through his window thinking, what the hell's going on behind me? It was me, and I was just trying to keep up with him. The handling wasn't very good. That
is just bad. Obviously, the 1.3 Popular Plus is not as good as the RS 2000 in that way.
No,
not really.
No. You would hope there was some slightly better shock absorbers
yeah.
on the 2000. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So with Gordon Jackson, they kind of upgraded him for the season 2 and 3 episodes, and you will then see him driving around in a sort of dark red. I think it's Jupiter red they called it.
Right.
Martin Granada. That again had a fake plate on it for both series, which was YHJ 766T. Rather like the Capri, there were actually two of those, one for 78, one for 79. The 78 was a 2.8 carburetted car. It was a gear, and it was VHK 518S in another VHK car. For 79 episodes, and actually in Honey to Nothing, which is a season 3 episode, you do actually see the genuine plate on it, which is FEV24T. This particular car is actually an injection, because the Granada was available with both a carburetor and an injection. And I think you could get single and twin carbs, so there's different engine options of a 2.8. What do you make of that red Granada, Andy?
Well, I think the colour at the time was that kind of like almost pearlescent red deep pearlescent red was very unusual at the time. So that certainly stood out. And it was almost like an executive's car. It was like a diplomat's car. It was you thought he was driving he was behaving like a diplomat. He had a telephone in the middle of the back seat.
That's right. He had a phone in the back.
That he was making calls to the minister on and stuff like that. So it was very much an executive car, yes. And it was a different look because of the colourings of the car. Throughout time, you notice that there's some certain changes in colours, and it's far more easy to spot now because we had a few years ago, everybody wanted a white car. We all drove around in white cars. Now the colour's grey, and you're starting to see grey cars and even vans flooding the market. So colours do change, and they can make a real impact. And back then, that kind of like, it wasn't a burgundy, it was light, it was a little bit fresher than that. But that metallic was a superb colour. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah. And then, of course, really, we can sort of wrap this up by saying that they kind of kept similar cars in the 4th and 5th series, apart from Doyle, who went to a Frida Duress Capri as well. But his one was, I think it's called Solar Gold or something, or Oyster Gold. I can't remember. You'll be able to tell me in the comments below what colour it actually is, because the car used in the 4th and 5th season is actually slightly different. They're not the same car. In the 4th series, his sort of gold colour car is OAR567W. That's the false plate. It's actually got a genuine plate of OAR567V. Then Bodie kept a silver Capri Frida Duress, which was OCW827W on the screen, but OCW827V when with a genuine plate. That car I think is still around as well, as far as I know. With the Granada, with this for the 4th and 5th series, they changed from one that was like a Jupiter red. They changed it to what's called a midnight blue. It looks black, but it's a very dark blue colour. And so for the 4th series, it was OWC822W on screen and OCW822V in real life. Now that car has definitely been scrapped. When we went sadly. When we went to the 5th series, there was only 5 episodes made in the 5th series, although they sort of spread them around a bit, so the 5th series wasn't actually just 5 episodes, it was actually a bit more because they used some hell of ones in the 4th series. The Capri that Lewis Collins drove was VHK 12W. One Martin Shaw had was VHK 11W, which is slightly different to the gold colour. I don't know quite what you'd say sort of what it is. It's a bit sandier, I think. And then the car that Gordon Jackson had, another Granada 2.8 gear, UJN 696W. What do you think of these sort of dark blue colour on the Granada and the gold colour on the Capri, Andy?
Oh, that's a difficult question, isn't it? Well, I think the gold colour is like a theme that had run right throughout the series, isn't it? Mm-hmm. There's been quite a number of gold cars throughout the series.
That's right, yeah.
But the midnight blue that looked like black was quite a departure, and I don't think anybody had been doing that colour on anything that I can remember up until that point for maybe over a decade. I don't think anybody had used a very, very, very dark blue. But it was nice to see the cars get changed around a bit and changed up, because the cars were a big feature of that series, and it would have, how dull would it have been if they'd just been allocated one car and they'd used that one car throughout the entire series,
like Inspector Morse.
Or Randall Hopkirk used the same car from start to finish, one Vauxhall, and but I think that's one of the things that makes the Professionals so endearing and so special, is that the cars did change, and you saw, in the early days, in the first series, obviously not, but once they got the deal signed with Ford rather than, and they'd elbowed BL, then you started to see the products arriving, and you started to see the up-to-the-minute cars. I remember being in school and looking at the up-to-the-minute cars on that show and talking about it with my friends in the playground, and how you were waiting to see what came out next. It was very exciting.
I mean, we'll do a separate video about some of the what I call the guest cars in Professionals, because there's a surprising number of like product placed cars from other manufacturers. I mean, Suzuki and Porsche are just two I could mention who actually got their cars into Professionals on press plates, which is remarkable considering how Ford dominated it was. But I think this one's gone on a bit longer than we imagined because we just had so much to say. So I hope you found that video to be informative. And again, obviously, if you want to watch the second part, it's gone again.
Hello, everybody.
Hello again.
We're back.
Then please stay tuned for that. My website is www.lloydvehicleconsulting.co.uk, and if you wish me to source a car for you, it could be a Capri. I love Capris, or something else. Then please do use the contact tab on the homepage to get in touch. And I've also got a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Lloyd Vehicle Consulting. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Thank you ever so much indeed for watching.
Thank you. Bye.